What are my thoughts on syncretism? Well, Daithí agus Fáilte. Hi, hello, and welcome. Jon O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School here. And this is a Kester question that popped up on our community channels recently enough. I've been doing work talking about the availability of spiritual practice and people of different cultures or diaspora culture trying to access or connect with their own spirituality via their ancestors or via their calling or passion about Ireland, its landscapes, its spirituality, its mythology, etc. And so one of the questions that quite organically and quite importantly did come up was asking about my thoughts on syncretism. So the first step really in kind of cracking into this is giving a definition of what syncretism is. And so if you go in and just have a quick Google on it, which is what I did to just make sure that my understanding of the definition was where I was coming from. Syncretism is a reconciliation or fusion of different systems of belief, be it philosophy, religion, especially where success is partial or the result of heterogeneous, or the result is heterogeneous. Genius, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that word right. But what this is saying is that when we talk about syncretism, it's not a pure blending. It is that there is only a partial success. There's some kind of bridging of different philosophies or beliefs, but there's still some non-conformity or disparity that occurs when trying to bring this union together. Another definition is the union of or attempted fusion of different systems of thought or belief, especially when it comes to religion or philosophy. So, the person asking this question is quite sound in coming at it, and it is a very valid position to wonder and to ponder about because when we talk about Irish paganism here, from the point of view of Irish Pagan School, we have to acknowledge that what exists today is something that we have to kind of revisit, and we're constantly viewing and exploring. I refer to myself and Laura as spiritual archaeologists in some way because Ireland was colonized, not just by oppressive powers of the UK and everyone else, but also by the Catholic Church, with the intention of eradicating and removing the native spirituality of the landscape itself. But those stories did exist and still do exist. They were copied down and transcribed from our ancient oral tradition into medieval manuscripts, which we know occurred between the 8th and the 14th to 15th centuries, Common Era. Now, we don't have manuscripts from the 8th century, but we do have linguistic copies from the 8th and 9th centuries, which, like, linguistically, Irish has changed. So academics have studied not just the carbon dating of the sheaves of vellum script that we have from the monastic time frame, but also the linguistics, the structure of the language that is on it. And in some cases, they can point and say, yeah, that's not 11th or 12th century Irish, that's 8th or 9th century Irish, which we know from the history of the monastic period in Ireland. They were copying and recopying. When books became aged or faded, they were copied and recopied to preserve the information inside them. So, why am I talking about Christian monks? Why am I talking about them? It's because that's the first step in this syncretism that occurred in Ireland. The arrival of the first Christians into Ireland, they actually came not as colonizers, they actually came not as missionaries, they came as hermits. Islands off the coast of Ireland, particularly Skellig Fiheel or Skellig Michael, as it's also known, made very famous in the recent Star Wars sagas, was a hermitage. It was a place for people who were trying to explore their spirituality away from the mainstream center of their spiritual nexus, which of course is Vatican and Rome at the time. So they went to the furthest place they could go, which was the edge of the world as far as we understood it at that time, in order to remove themselves from the influences of the culture or everything else to just dive deep into a spiritual practice and a spiritual lifestyle. Now, of course, what happens then is how are they going to survive? If they don't interact with the people who are in the landscape already, if they don't find some way to trade or grow or in some process to survive. And so that's where the blending really begins. Now, later on during the medieval period, we have this dedicated missionary. I don't know which particular pope it was, but there was a bishop who came to visit these hermits that had left. They're like, oh, wait, wasn't there those hermits that went to Ireland? And the bishop came over, and then they had a whole moment of, oh, whoa, whoa, this isn't Christianity anymore. What the hell are you practicing? And they sent a worried letter back to the Pope at the time, and the Vatican at that time issued a missionary like engagement. That we got to go and like bring the true word and bring. It was an invasion. Like it literally was a spiritual invasion of the island. Um, so the reason why I bring up this history of things is to highlight that there are different ways in which syncretism occurs. So syncretism, when it occurs organically, when it occurs naturally, as cultures share and as people communicate and talk about their beliefs and share their philosophies, that's a very organic thing that happens when cultures merge and intermingle. And it is a beautiful thing, and it does lead to new expressions and new understandings of spiritual self, spiritual identity, practices, rituals, etc. But the other side of it is when syncretism is enforced, when it is directed and targeted in order to try and steal away the power of existing pagan practices and supplant it by other like spiritual namings. For example, there are so many healing and spiritual wells in the landscape of Ireland which are known through mythology as places of healing. But now every time you go anywhere near them, there's a statue of Mary, statue of Patrick, statue of Bridget on it. Very famously, there's Bridget's Well in Kildare, and still, there are pilgrimages to Bridget's Well to receive healing. But now it's Saint Bridget of the Catholic Church, as opposed to Goddess Bridget of the island before even the Catholics or Christians arrived. So it's quite common. The way the Christian Church went about their conquest, really, or missionary work, was to supplant, was to go in and, take information from other pre-existing cultures, pre-existing spiritual beliefs, and enforce their own narrative on top of it. The whole propaganda of St. Patrick and him as representing the arrival of Christianity into Ireland, it's not true. It honestly is not true. There were so many things that are attributed to St. Patrick, which are actually done by a guy called Pelagius, who was about a century or more before Patrick even arrived on the island. So this rewriting of the narrative and then using that to drive and to force syncretism, to drive and force this merging or fusion of disparate beliefs, which is why, the Messiah of the Catholic Church or the Christian belief, their prophet, their holy person, Jesus, like the guy I was raised with, he wasn't born in December. Christmas was used, this December celebration was a replacement of the Yule celebrations that already existed for pagan people. The whole Easter, he came back from the dead but oh, this specifically, this is why, it was always the same. It was always the story of the Christian belief in the one true God. It just happened to align with what you were doing beforehand, but that was to prepare you so that, you would be ready for the one true God when he arrived. Literally the narrative that was used, which is why, again, pagan spiritual practices around changing in seasons suddenly became co-opted or blended into this forced syncretism of other spiritual practices in order to dominate and control a people. So, thoughts on syncretism. So I've covered a bit of the history, and maybe you're getting an understanding of some of the my personal feelings about it, and to kind of pull it to a crux or a core moment. Um, I have no problem with the sharing and the growth in expressing knowledge when communities come together, connect, and grow organically. And so, like the Christian Catholic belief, the Catholic belief in Ireland involves candle magic, involves weather practices. If someone's granny ever went and lit a candle for them in a church so that they would pass their driving test or pass a national exam, that's not Christian. That's candle magic. That's pagan, but it's still a blended practice that has occurred in our country. There's a particular Christian statue known as the Child of Prague, which is this visual manifestation of the child Christ, which was seen in Prague. And there's many statues of the Child of Prague that have been created. But in Ireland, almost uniquely in some way, the Child of Prague is used as a totem for weather magic. If you want to secure a good weather for your wedding practice or for something that you're going to be doing outdoors, you take the statue and you put it under a bush the night before outside. And some of these statues have no heads anymore because there was a fault in the first ones that were done. But it wasn't that the statue suddenly was broken and was no use. It was actually more valuable if the head of the statue fell off. So you have this headless effigy being placed outside under a bush to secure good weather. Is that really Christian belief, or is that pagan belief that has syncretically blended over into the expression of what the Irish culture were looking and still doing within their landscape? So organic syncretism, it happens. But that doesn't mean that it replaces or overdoes or supplants or is better than the original practices before. And so this is where we get into that other narrative of forced syncretism. And unfortunately, we see a lot of it in neo-pagan circles at the moment, in more modern spiritual practices, and the big underlying bugbear behind all of this is actually colonization and colonial entitlement. People feeling that, well, I'm just going to take part of this spiritual practice, that they in some way use this syncretism or this organic blending. Oh, sure, well, it happens everywhere. Like, so why should you be precious of it? Why should you like try and stop it? Because it's going to happen anyway. And then people use this as an excuse for selectively cherry picking practices from a variety of different spiritual pathways whilst ignoring the cultural context, whilst ignoring the historical context, whilst feeling in essence entitled to worship the way they want to worship, regardless of anyone else's opinion. Now, of course, absolutely, you do you. You live your life, you find your spiritual like fulfillment. But as an educator and as a teacher, this is a problem. This is a difficulty that I come across where people go, "Ah, sure, it's all just Celtic belief anyway," and Lou is like Apollo. You've taken two or three like syncretic blinks here, and suddenly you're following Rome, like Julius Caesar's conquest and justifying eradication of natural native cultural expression because it's all the one thing. Or sure, the Dagda uses, or Gwivnu, the Smith god, for example, that's just Hephaestus, or that's just Vulcan, or that's just any other smithing god, Succulus from France, like, or Thor in the Norse mythology, even though Thor's not a smithing god, he has a hammer. So the problem that hopefully I'm coming across, I'm trying to express it as kind of gently as I can without turning it into a full-on rant and ramble. The problem with forcing syncretism is you're ignoring aspects or people, not saying you, like, not the person who asked this question. Unfortunately, okay, I'm getting around myself because I'm quite passionate about this, and time and again I have to educate against this entitlement or against the misinformation that comes from this. So, oh well, suddenly, the Morrigan, for example, oh well, she had sex in the mythology, so she's a sexy goddess. No, absolutely fucking not. Oh, but she offers sex to, like, Cuchulainn, so she's a sex goddess. No, she's absolutely fucking not. That was a sovereignty exchange. And so the problem here is if you don't have the cultural context, if you don't have the understanding of what is actually happening, suddenly you're twisting and shifting through misinformation or misunderstanding, whether it's intentional or not, or whether it was something that was handed down to you, or I actually had someone send me an email asking a question. I clarified and answered saying, actually, no, here's where the information got twisted for you. This is the person involved with intentionally twisting that narrative. Here's some really good resources. The response I got was, well, that's part of my tradition practice for the last 50 years. So, like, I'm just going to carry on doing what I'm doing, ignoring the hundreds, thousands of years of pagan practice that has existed on the island. This individual was like, well, no, it's been part of my tradition for all of this time. And I was like, okay, well, how long is your tradition? 50 years, less than one person's lifetime. And again, I'm not hating on anyone. It's about like find your spiritual connection where you can, follow your spiritual curiosity where you can, but don't presume for a moment that you know better or your expression or your blended spirituality is superior to the root spiritualities that it comes from. This is the problem here. It's that don't. again, if cultures blend and expressions blend and stuff grows into something new and more beautiful, that's how it's always going to happen. But if someone comes in and then forcibly splices chakras from the Middle Eastern expressions onto a poem from Ireland's past, the Cauldron of Poesy, about cauldrons and knowledge and the skill in poetry and art, it's not syncretism. It's not an organic blending. It's a forced narrative or trying to justify a new progress or process of not even spiritual belief. Usually it's down to a person's ego or a person's looking to position themselves as an expert or to either socially credit or financially credit from what they're trying to do by stealing or taking information from native cultures. It's the core of appropriation, which goes to this entitled colonizing mindset. So I know you came to ask a question about syncretism, and suddenly here we are down the road into, well, it's colonization and it's entitlement and it's a problem. That's not the root of what I'm saying here. Okay, don't like that's an aspect of what I'm advising on. That's an aspect of what I'm educating on as an educator who has been years going against this misinformation and challenging the entitlement that goes along with it, where people say, "Oh, well, no, surely I should be able to just do it my way." Absolutely, you do you. Who's me to stop you? But if you come and ask me an honest question, I'll give you an honest answer. I'll cite my sources. I'll point to the history. I'll give you the cultural context. Whether you choose to take that on board or not is absolutely within your own choice and your own will and want and sovereignty. And it's okay to disagree about things, but forced syncretism or using syncretism as a justification to treat all gods, guides, guardians as a pick and mix in order to fulfill your own personal spiritual void, that's not right relationship. That's not healthy spiritual practice. I've been asked to step in with some people in the past. It's like, okay, well now my life is on a tizzy. I need a bit of help on something. And sometimes we chew it down, we try and find out what's going on, and the person has 15 different altars, six different statues, and they're like, oh, I put this out for them, this out for them, this out for them, that over there. And they have this whole program that they think they're doing right, but in essence, they've just cherry-picked belief structures across an entire paradigm and they've built nothing deep. They're in the paddling pool of spirituality, thinking that that's enough, as opposed to committing to a spiritual relationship, committing to a spiritual connection to self, and being willing to go deep, to do the uncomfortable work, and to grow and explore deeper consciousness, deeper spiritual practices. But now I'm sounding like I'm ranting. And I apologize if that's coming across. Again, really, really great question and quite common. Syncretism, it's this blending. Oh, well, sure, it's all going to blend, it's all going to come together. But even the definition of syncretism includes this attempted fusion or partial results, partial success, and this heterogeneous, which where things don't actually mix, that there is some discontinuity, there is some discord when philosophies or beliefs come together. And that's normal, that's healthy. There should be room for looking at the things that don't fit and asking those questions and exploring it intellectually, consciously, but also emotionally and spiritually to try and find out, well, is this syncretic blend of spiritual practice really fulfilling for me? Or do I need to deep dive into the roots of where it comes from? And I'm not just talking Irish paganism, like if it's First Nations beliefs or if it's like, Indian, Hindu, like Buddhist philosophy, wherever you're actually coming across, like you might be able to connect in some way at the syncretic blended level. But when you want to go deeper into a sense of spiritual wellness, a sense of spiritual completeness, invariably people tend to strip away what doesn't seem to fit or go they end up almost desyncretizing. They end up like, breaking apart and saying, actually, well, no, this part is not in keeping with my spiritual trajectory, or this part doesn't actually fit with me. And they delve down, they deep dive down. They're no longer distracted by pretty flowers. They're looking at the leaves of the plant, and then they get down to the roots, and they want to know, what is the cultural context? What is the historical context? How do I deepen myself within this spiritual belief and spiritual practice? And again, it's not just Irish paganism. This applies across the board in any form of spiritual belief. But that really is my thoughts on syncretism. Like, organically, these things do happen over time. But the problem that I have seen in my years of experience with this is when people try and use syncretism to, or this concept of, oh, sure, they're all Celtic gods anyway. Absolutely fucking not. The experience of Irish people on the island of Ireland is very uniquely different to the Welsh people in Wales, is very uniquely different to French people in France. All of which are Celtic, like Celtic races, because, and even race is wrong, Celtic by their linguistic connection and structure, because that's what Celtic actually is. So hopefully this has been not too much of a rambling answer. Hopefully it's been detailed enough, but also clear enough where my stance and what my thoughts are when it comes to syncretism. I'm not against any particular practice or beliefs. I'm against poor behaviors based on entitlement and colonization and appropriation. Anytime anyone wants to come and have a conversation, I'd be delighted to have a conversation, because in sharing perspectives, we all are enlightened, we all grow in understanding. And when we have understanding, it inherently leads to compassion, as opposed to hard lines of divisive, well, no, like, it's written down specifically in this particular part of this particular book, and that's why I'm treating someone poorly. No. Like, all forms of spiritual practice, deep spiritual practice, include respect and connection and bonding with other people. And only people who are driving this entitled, colonized mentality will use their spirituality as a stick to conquer, colonize, or appropriate other people, as again was done to the Irish people a long time ago. And still, actually, the grip of the Catholic Church in Ireland is weakening, thankfully, in the last while, but because of decades of atrocities done to the Irish people by the power structure. Again, I've no problem with Catholic faith. I've no problem with people who engage in their own spiritual practice for their own spiritual fulfillment. Absolutely no problem with that. But an organization that weaponizes spirituality to justify control of a population, to justify abuse, and to rotate around, call it what it is, pedophiles, and believe that these pedophiles are above national law because they're bound by canon law, uh, actual quotes, in the past from the Catholic Church in Ireland, is a problem. So, but I feel like I'm going to steer off our topic, syncretism. Hopefully, this has been an insight. Hopefully, this has been interesting. If anyone else have any questions or questions, fire them into the comments. I'll do my best to come back and have a look at them and to answer them as honestly and directly as I can. And don't forget, if you're looking to know more, if you're looking to grow more and deepen your spiritual connection for yourself, we have over a year's worth of free resources available. irishpagan.school/free. And then when you're ready to go further, a whole lot of content on our school as well, irishpaganschool.com. And thank you very much. I'm really, really grateful to all of you turning up and to connecting with our content here. And look after yourself. Take care. Agus Slán. Goodbye.